September 1954. A 19-year-old truck driver stands outside the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee. He's wearing clothes that don't quite fit the venue. His hair is longer than what's acceptable, and he's about to walk into the most important building in country music, carrying something the industry doesn't want. His name is Elvis Presley, and within minutes, the Grand Ole Opry will tell him to go back to driving trucks. This is the moment that's been mythologized, misreported, and misunderstood for 70 years. The rejection that supposedly broke Elvis's heart, the audition that failed, the dream that died in Nashville. Except none of that is exactly true. What actually happened that night was more complicated, more revealing, and ultimately more important than the legend suggests. Because this wasn't just about one singer being turned away, it was about an entire industry protecting itself from the future. And the future had just walked through their door. Let's be clear about what is documented. Elvis Presley did perform at the Grand Ole Opry on October 2, 1954, not September, October. He wasn't auditioning. He had already been booked as a guest performer, brought in by Jim Denny, the Opry's talent manager, after Sam Phillips at Sun Records pushed for the opportunity. Elvis performed one song that night, Blue Moon of Kentucky. It was a Bill Monroe bluegrass standard, but what Elvis did to it wasn't standard at all. He had sped it up, added rhythm, blurred the lines between country, blues, and something no one had named yet. The arrangement was raw, urgent, and nothing like what the Opry audience expected on a Saturday night. The performance lasted less than 3 minutes. Afterward, Jim Denny told Elvis he should go back to driving trucks. That part is documented. Denny said it. Whether he meant it as career advice or dismissal is less clear, but the effect was the same. Elvis left Nashville that night knowing the country music establishment didn't want him. The question is, why? It wasn't about talent. Even Denny acknowledged Elvis could sing. It wasn't about professionalism. Elvis showed up on time, performed as requested, and didn't cause trouble. It was about fit. And Elvis Presley did not fit. The Grand Ole Opry in 1954 was not just a radio show. It was the gatekeeper of country music, the arbiter of what belonged and what didn't. It had standards, dress codes, sonic boundaries, a clear sense of tradition. Country music, as the Opry defined it, was about restraint, clarity, stories told plainly, instruments that stayed in their lane, voices that didn't showboat. Elvis did none of that. His version of Blue Moon of Kentucky wasn't just fast, it was aggressive. It leaned into rhythm in a way that felt more like jump blues than bluegrass. His vocal delivery had a looseness, a sexuality that made people uncomfortable. And his stage presence, even in those early days, didn't match the Opry's expectations. The Opry wanted performers who stood still, respected the microphone, and let the song do the work. Elvis moved. Not wildly, not yet, but enough that it registered as different, as inappropriate, as something that didn't belong on that stage. Jim Denny's comment about driving trucks wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict. You don't fit here. Go do something else. What's fascinating is how clearly Denny saw what Elvis was, and how completely he misunderstood what that meant. He saw the rebellion, the genre blurring, the refusal to stay inside the lines. But he saw it as a problem, not a breakthrough. He heard the future, and he said no. Here's what we know Elvis did next. He didn't go back to driving trucks. Within weeks, he was performing on the Louisiana Hayride, a rival radio show based in Shreveport. The Hayride had a younger audience, fewer restrictions, and a willingness to gamble on artists the Opry wouldn't touch. They gave Elvis a regular spot, a contract, room to experiment. And while Nashville was protecting its traditions, Shreveport was launching a revolution. But before we get to what happened after, we need to understand what Nashville was protecting and why Elvis threatened it so completely. What Nashville wanted, what Elvis was. The Grand Ole Opry didn't reject Elvis Presley because they were blind to talent. They rejected him because they saw exactly what he was, and they wanted no part of it. To understand why, you have to understand what country music meant in 1954, not just as a sound, but as an identity. Country music was white, rural, traditional. It drew clear lines between itself and the music of Black America, blues, gospel, rhythm and blues. Those lines weren't just aesthetic, They were social, cultural, racial. The industry knew those lines mattered, and they policed them. Hank Williams, the biggest star the Opry ever had, learned blues phrasing from a black street musician named Rufus Payne, but he didn't talk about it much. He sang it in a way that white audiences could accept. He stayed inside the boundaries. Elvis didn't. His version of Blue Moon of Kentucky wasn't just up-tempo, it was black-inflected. You could hear the blues in it, the rhythm and blues, the gospel shout. He wasn't covering a country song in a country way. He was transforming it into something hybrid, something that crossed lines Nashville had spent decades reinforcing. And he did it naturally, unselfconsciously, like the lines didn't exist. That's what made him dangerous. It wasn't rebellion for its own sake. It was instinct. Elvis had grown up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and then Memphis, Tennessee, places where black and white musical traditions lived close enough to bleed into each other. He absorbed both. He sang in church and listened to blues on Beale Street. He didn't see those as separate worlds, but the country music industry did. When Jim Denny heard Elvis that night, he didn't just hear a kid who sang too loose. He heard the collapse of a category, the blurring of a line the industry depended on, and he rejected it. Not loudly, not with an explanation, just with a single sentence. Go back to driving trucks. What's important to understand is that Denny wasn't wrong about the risk. Elvis was dangerous to the establishment, not because he wanted to destroy country music, but because he represented something it couldn't control, a new generation that didn't care about the old boundaries. The Opry's audience that night didn't riot. They didn't boo. The documented accounts suggest polite, scattered applause. Nothing enthusiastic, nothing hostile, just tepid. But tepid was enough, because the Opry didn't need to love you, it needed to love you enough to bring you back. And they didn't bring Elvis back. He performed once, and that was it. Here's what's often misunderstood. Elvis didn't walk out of the Ryman Auditorium heartbroken and defeated. He walked out knowing that Nashville wasn't going to be his path, knowing that the country music establishment saw him as a problem, not a solution, knowing that if he was going to succeed, it would have to be somewhere else, as something else. And that clarity, painful as it was, became the foundation of everything that followed, because once Nashville said no, Elvis stopped trying to fit. He went to Shreveport and played the Louisiana Hair Ride, where the rules were looser and the audience was younger. He signed with RCA Victor in 1955, where they didn't care if he sounded country or blues or something in between. They cared if he sold records, and he did. By 1956, Elvis Presley was the biggest star in American music. Not country music, not rhythm and blues, all music. He had taken the thing Nashville rejected, the blurred lines, the sexual energy, the genre-crossing instinct, and turned it into a cultural earthquake. And the Grand Ole Opry was still in the same building, playing the same songs, wondering what had happened. Here's the part that gets left out of the story. The Grand Ole Opry didn't destroy Elvis Presley's career when they turned him away. They freed it. Because as long as Elvis was trying to be a country singer, he was trying to fit inside a box that was never built for him. Nashville's rejection didn't close a door, it clarified the path. If the Opry had embraced him, Elvis might have spent years trying to soften his sound, smooth his edges, become the kind of artist they could manage. He might have succeeded. He might have become a respectable country star with a decent career and a bus full of compromise. Instead, he became Elvis. The rejection forced him out of Nashville's orbit and into a wider, wilder world. It pushed him toward rock and roll, a genre that didn't even have a name yet when he walked out of the Ryman Auditorium. And it gave him something powerful, proof that the establishment was wrong. By 1956, Elvis was selling millions of records. He was on The Ed Sullivan Show. He was causing moral panic and teenage hysteria in equal measure. He had become the biggest cultural phenomenon in America. And the Grand Ole Opry was still doing what it had always done. They didn't evolve. They didn't adapt. They stayed exactly where they were, guardians of a tradition that was rapidly becoming nostalgia. Here's what's documented. The Opry never invited Elvis back. Not in 1956, when he was on top of the world. Not in the 60s, when he was making movies. Not in the 70s, when he was selling out arenas and drowning in his own fame. He performed there once, October 2, 1954. and never again. Some accounts suggest Elvis held a grudge, that he was hurt by the rejection and refused to return even if asked. Other accounts suggest he simply moved on, that Nashville became irrelevant to him. Both might be true.
What we know for certain is this: the Opry needed Elvis far more than Elvis needed the Opry, and they lost him. The mythology around this moment tends to paint it as tragedy, the boy who got rejected, the dream that died. But that's the wrong frame. This was liberation. Elvis didn't fail in Nashville. Nashville failed to recognize what it had. And that failure didn't stop him. It launched him. Because once the gatekeeper said no, Elvis stopped asking permission. He recorded Heartbreak Hotel in January 1956. It went to #1 on the pop, country, and rhythm and blues charts, something that wasn't supposed to be possible, something that violated every boundary the industry had built. He appeared on television and moved his hips in ways that got him censored. He made parents furious and teenagers obsessed. He became a symbol of generational rebellion without even trying. And all of it, every bit of it, started with a moment in Nashville when someone looked at him and said, "You don't belong here." They were right. He didn't belong there. He belonged everywhere else. Here's the lesson the music industry learned slowly, painfully over the next decade. You can't control the future by rejecting it. The Grand Ole Opry tried. They drew their lines, they protected their traditions. They said no to the kid who didn't fit. And the kid went on to change music anyway. Not because he was trying to destroy country music, but because he was trying to be himself. And himself was bigger, stranger, and more powerful than any single genre could contain. By the time the industry caught up, Elvis was already gone. Not dead, but beyond their reach. He had become something they couldn't manage, couldn't categorize, couldn't fit into the Saturday night radio slot. He had become a revolution. And it started the night Nashville said no. So when people talk about the moment Elvis was rejected at the Grand Ole Opry, they usually frame it as a tragedy, the heartbreak, the failure. But maybe it was the opposite. Maybe it was the best thing that ever happened to him, because that rejection gave him clarity. It gave him freedom. It gave him permission to stop trying to fit and start building something new. And what he built didn't just change his life. It changed everything that followed.